When situations like this exist, there's always problems. And the medical department has certainly had their share. But so many men mustered so quickly, with inadequate discipline from their officers, they quickly forget the common courtesy and personal care that is so common within civilian life. Young men, most of whom are away from home for the first time, allow the camps to become pigsties. Garbage accumulates everywhere. The indiscriminate defecation around the tents, the emissions from the latrines, and the excretion from horses soon lead to depressing mental agencies. This leads the soldiers to neglect bathing, brushing their teeth, combing their hair, which soon leads to body lice and bad odors and those overcrowded, fly-infested tents. And of course, this all leads to disease, which is currently taking 2/3 of all the brave and courageous men we're losing in this war. Dysentery and diarrhea, mumps, measles, the fevers, consumption, scurvy, they're all taking their toll. Dysentery and diarrhea alone is claiming more lives of our brave and courageous men than enemy bullets. Now, there's a lot of medical opinions around the surgeons on what's causing this problem. There are those who believe it's the diet, the hardtack, which the soldiers jokingly call worm castles, the salt pork, which is black on the outside and pink with gratification on the inside, and the navy beans, which are so hard that they're almost indigestible. The Army calls these iron rations. There's others that believe it's the vast amount of coffee the soldiers are drinking. There are those who believe they're sleeping out in the cold. But most of the surgeons do agree that the major cause of the problem is the bad odors that emanate within the camps, this noxious effluvia, which is causing most of the dysentery and diarrhea. Now, the soldiers have been able to keep a pretty good sense of opinion about it. They jokingly call it the trots and the Tennessee quick-step. Now, your pamphlets that you have been distributing to the camps and your inspections of the camps have helped out greatly. But because of this effort, I'm very happy to be able to report to you now that at the first sign of dysentery and diarrhea, the soldiers are issued flannel belly bands. And the tents are now being struck at least once a week for aeration. And every night, 3 inches of sand is being put on the latrines. But there's much, much more that has to be done. And we need your help. We need quilts and food and blankets and clothing. We need money, if you can, to help us replenish these medical supplies we lost in this last campaign. Please help us help those who are giving so much of themselves to preserve this nation. And thank you for your past support.
I was living in Washington society, hoping for an occasional visit with my husband, who was serving with the Union forces under General Pope. It was the last morning of August in 1862 that an urgent appeal came into Washington asking for women to help tend to the wounded after a raging battle at Manassas. The next morning, I found myself on a wagon train filled with medical supplies and other naive and hopeful wives and mothers, each one of us praying that our loved ones would not be among the wounded. None of us had any experience beyond household nursing. There was a drenching rain that day, and we were soaked through and through. As we began to approach a large barn, we could hear the cries and the moans of the many wounded. There was a stench in the air that was unbearable. It made us want to retch and feel faint. And it took all our sheer will and determination to make our legs move as we struggled through the mud, attempting to step over the seemingly hundreds of men stretched out before that barn door. When that door was open, it was to a carnage unbelievable. There were operating tables consisting mainly of piles of rails covered with a few rough wooden boards. Arms and legs were piled by those surgical altars. The surgeons were so covered in blood that they were indistinguishable from the wounded. And men were everywhere, crying and moaning and begging for help. These scenes stretch out before me now with a sense of vivid reality. And I know only too well how real they are. I see before me a young man stretched out on those bloody boards, chloroform administered, but before insensibility, the operation would begin. Amid shrieks and cries and wild laughter, the surgeon would wield over his victim his glittering knife and sword. And soon, that severed and ghastly limb, white as snow and covered with blood, would fall to the floor, one more added to that terrible pile. For 36 hours I worked, comforting the men, feeding them, praying with them, and crying with them. And sometimes even helping the surgeon with his terrible butchery. At one time I felt faint and the surgeon had to revive me with brandy. After a few hours' rest, I would return again to the same grueling tasks. After a week of unrelenting horror, I was overcome with exhaustion and had to return home to Washington with the wounded, only to see the same sights over and over again. Shortly after my arrival in Washington, I received the devastating news of my husband's death at Bull Run. I took little time to grieve, however, for I had already decided that I would devote my life to the nursing of our courageous men.
It's the third day of Gettysburg that stands out foremost in my mind. While attending the wounded from the first and second day battles at the field hospital, a tremendous cannonade started hitting our troops at Cemetery Ridge. Feeling my services would be needed there, I hurried to the ridge and started to attend to those that I had found falling there. Then suddenly I heard that horrible rebel yell from 15,000 voices. Our cannons thundered, the muskets roared, sending out a continuous wall of hot iron and lead. And then suddenly a silence fell over the field. I noticed some of the soldiers standing at the wall gazing down into that valley, so I joined them. It was as if all hell itself had vomited upon the earth body parts, in a sea of red and gray and butternut. And then, as if somebody took a rock and threw it into the pond, this mass started to move, and the groans and the cries of those in tremendous pain, anguish, and agony echoed through the hills of Gettysburg, sending its message of death both north and south, soon to be joined by the howlings and the wailings of widowed women, orphan children, and broken-hearted mothers. So I knew what we were in for. I hurried as quickly as I could back to the field hospital just as they started to lay out those seemingly endless rows of tortured and twisted bodies. Some screaming to be taken first because of their great pain, others staring at the sky as they started to become conscious of what fate had in store for them. They started to cut and slice them. For 24 hours, they stepped out of that medical tent just to get the taste of blood out of my nose and thought only to be greeted by the pile of extremities that had accumulated there. It was on the 5th day that they started to move those cannons off Cemetery Ridge. And they seemed to be saying goodbye to the infantry as they climbed across the open field. Farewell, boys, farewell. Until we meet again on another day, on another field, where once again we'll cultivate the earth with human carnage and destruction. Farewell, boys, farewell.
I was working at the Armory Square Hospital, in a field hospital outside of Gettysburg, after a terrible 3-day battle there. As I was tending the wounded, I felt a tug on my apron. And at first I thought it was my son John. But no, I knew John was with General Grant at Vicksburg. His cries of mother tore me apart. He clutched in his hands a torn and bloodied letter addressed to Thomas Kelly, 88th New York Infantry, Irish Brigade. As I bathed his face and I gave him a drink of water, I knew that he wouldn't survive, or he had been shot in his abdomen. I returned again and again to his side that evening, where his repeated cries of "Mother, help me," touched my very soul. There was little I could do for him except to offer him the comfort and the love of the mother he thought that I was. His cries echo through my mind even now. Mother, I didn't run. Mother, everything's all right. Father Corby gave us absolution and told us not to turn our backs to the enemy. So I kept loading and firing and loading and firing. Never once did I turn my back. Don't worry about the farm, Mother. I'll be home soon. As I cradled his broken body in my arms, I began to sing to him, and soon a smile came to his face as he breathed his last. I carried this 17-year-old boy, John, with me until I was able to visit his mother. I told her of his love and his concern for her and of his bravery on the field. I told her how he thought that I was her and of his love and his concern for her. She thanked me, and she told me she was all alone now, could no longer keep the farm, since her husband's death at Bull Run and Thomas's at Gettysburg. I told her that I understood completely, for I too had lost my own husband at Manassas, and my own 17-year-old son, John, at Vicksburg on the very day that Thomas had died. We hugged each other and cried together, each one trying to gain some measure of solace for the other.
Look, Abigail, there's still much, much more to be done, and we must do our part to bind up the wounds of this great nation.